Thank you, everyone, for being at tonight's work session. Councilmember Harrison and Mayor Pro Tem Melton are absent and excused. And we will start tonight with an update on the South Downtown initiatives.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. I'm Evan Raleigh with the City Manager's Office and have the pleasure of introducing this work session topic to you this afternoon. So, as you all know, I'm sure you don't need any reminding, there's a lot of activity happening in the city's Southern Gateway. And so staff thought it would be prudent to provide you with an update on all the various projects that are taking place in our Southern Corridor and talk a little bit about how we are working to connect the efforts associated with each of those projects. So just in terms of an agenda, first we'll start with a little bit of history. And so we will hear just a brief overview of a lot of the planning documents and planning efforts that have sort of laid the foundation for a lot of the work that is actually currently occurring in the corridor. Then we'll turn to some more specific conversations about some of the projects. We will review the intended scopes, some of the timelines that are associated with those projects, and really kind of speak specifically to engagement opportunities, some that have already passed, some that are forthcoming related to those specific projects that we're going to talk about. We'll also speak to some broader ongoing coordination efforts that the city is really spearheading along in relationship to these projects. And we'll also talk about one major project, which I think of all the projects that we're going to touch on today is advancing certainly the quickest. And there are some significant choices and things that we are now encountering related to the relocation of Hat Amphitheater. And so we're going to spend some time talking to you about the design process to date and kind of what our current understanding is related to the opportunities on the site that we have dedicated for that project. So without further ado, I will turn the podium over to Pat Young to set the stage for you.
Thank you, Evan. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. Pat Young with Planning and Development. Thank you for the opportunity to give just some background and context on the efforts that you're going to hear about later today. A lot of the work that is underway and that is planned comes from some of the planning work that we've done over the last several years, starting with the Southern Gateway study. So that was conducted primarily in 2017. Really the focus there was to look at ensuring that there was both connection for this area with downtown and east-west connectivity. Because of natural features and transportation infrastructure such as the railroad, it's very limited, particularly for bicycles and pedestrians. And so this study looked at kind of development and redevelopment of this area. Those areas in blue were the focus areas, were large areas of planned redevelopment, many of which are now either under redevelopment or planned for redevelopment, and looked at the transportation network that would support and enable those goals. So I know this slide's a little busy and hard to see, but several of the items you're going to hear about today were envisioned in this 2017 plan, specifically the redesign of the intersection at MLK and Dawson and McDowell, which Ken Bowers and my team will discuss in more detail. The realignment of Lake Wheeler Road and South Saunders, which is in design, and then the extensions of Dorothea Drive and Southwest Street to become more of a functional street like Peace and Capitol to merge in with the intersection that I referenced. So again, these planning efforts were kind of the genesis or the embryonic thinking behind a lot of the efforts that are now underway and that are the private sector is also, of course, responding to this, and a lot of projects are underway in that area as well. The Dix Edge study that you all are, I think, all very familiar with was completed in 2023. Very similar set of concerns in the sense of there's kind of a super block that's formed by Walnut Creek and I-40, Fayetteville, MLK, and the park. And the intent there was to make sure that this area has both good internal connectivity, and you can see the dashed lines on this slide are planned streets, so that as redevelopment occurs in this area, as it inevitably will, there'll be requirements to make better street connectivity in that area. And then an additional emphasis was to ensure that there was high-quality connectivity to downtown and areas south of downtown, and you all, of course, are familiar with the Strollway effort, which is a big part of connecting Chavis Park with Dix Park. So in light of and in respect of those projects, we formed a group that we are calling the Southern Gateway Coordination Group that includes all the stakeholders you see on the slide here. And we've been meeting since earlier this year. This includes, as the slide indicates, significant number of private stakeholders to ensure there's close coordination between the public efforts and the city efforts. And those, of course, DOT as well. DOT controls Saunders and Dawson and several other streets in this area. So this stakeholder group has been really successful. There's been over 30 folks at these meetings. Our next meeting is on the 25th of this month. And the intention of that meeting is to daylight plans, talk about timelines, expectations, to ensure there's visibility and collaboration, because all of these projects that have been referenced and that you'll hear about later today are on different timelines. And you heard from from Assistant City Manager Raleigh that the Red Hat project will probably be out front. It's kind of driving some of that. So here's the list of projects. The ones on the left are the ones we'll go into a little bit of detail today. The ones on the right are other projects that we can certainly discuss or answer questions about. But we didn't do a deep dive on today's because you've heard about them in other contexts. But so I'm going to turn it over to Ken Bowers of our team now to talk a little bit about some of these projects that are going on in the Southern Gateway area. And we'll be available for questions at the end.
So early this year, it became apparent that there were some things happening here on the southern end of the downtown that were going to force some decisions about implementation of some of those ideas that came out of the Southern Gateway study. And I'll highlight a couple of them. One is a private development project highlighted here in blue, City Gateway. First phase of that is pretty close to completion, and later phases are still in the approval process, but in an advanced state there. And there is an existing highway ramp that goes from Martin Luther King Boulevard westbound onto northbound McDowell Street, where the right-of-way under that has already been transferred to private hands, and the ramp is still operating, but the later phases of this project will remove that ramp, and the developer has to replace those movements somewhere else, and the obvious target for that is in the southeast quadrant of this interchange. And then Heritage Park, Raleigh Housing Authority has been working on a redevelopment plan for that aging development. There is a desire to increase the amount of affordable housing that's on the site as part of that. They have run an extensive community outreach campaign, and as you saw in Patrick's slides, the city has on its street plan, and this is currently an adopted part of the street plan, an extension of West Street and Dorothea Drive to create a street grid through that. But a lot of concerns have been raised about that transportation infrastructure and its impact on the redevelopment of Heritage Park, both by the Housing Authority and by the community residents. And so there was a need to actively look at that and options for how to achieve the objectives of that in a way that meets the development goals of Heritage Park. And then, of course, added to this mix is the future of South Street that's programmed to be closed as part of the relocation of the Hat Amphitheater. There was clearly a lot of moving pieces. There's a sewer line that runs through on the edge of the Heritage Park property, and if that could be relocated more tightly towards South Dawson Street, that would also free up additional land to accommodate more affordable housing on the Heritage Park. That project is also programmed. It's going to happen. The current plan is to replace it in place, but by looking at the interchange here and potential redesign, there becomes the opportunity to use this project as a way to relocate that line out of the way so that it will be less of an encumbrance on the future of the Heritage Park redevelopment. So all of these things are all happening, were all percolating, and no one at the time was coordinating discussions between them and how they related to each other. So we took on the task of doing that. And so we were in the position of having to try to accelerate a discussion that I think would have normally unfolded over a couple of years into a time period of a few months. And what we did was we gathered all these stakeholders together, all the housing authority, the city departments, North Carolina Department of Transportation, who obviously have jurisdiction over all the transportation infrastructure here, representatives from the major development projects, including City Gateway and Capitol Square, that are also being impacted by these changes, and to convene a series of meetings to talk through some options. What we did was we have developed a couple of options working with these partners, and the time has come now to study them. And so that study is underway right now. I'll just talk briefly about what those are. So this is a modification of what was shown in the Southern Gateway Plan, and it tries to tighten up the existing ramp infrastructure in the northwest quadrant of the interchange. And in order to deal with some of the traffic impacts through a combination of traffic calming, maybe a one-way street roundabout, and offsetting West Street so it doesn't go straight through, still create some sort of street grid through Heritage Park, but mitigate the traffic impacts. So that's one alternative that the city has worked on with NCDOT that we think is feasible. The extension of Kinley Street and the removal of the westbound ramp, westbound to northbound ramp would be accommodated with both a new left turn from northbound McDowell into this revamped interchange. That's a movement you can't make today, as well as an additional movement added from Martin Luther King westbound to go south and then under the bridge to go northbound on McDowell. And then the other option, which was put together by consultants for the Raleigh Housing Authority, is to take all of the movements accommodated by the ramps and relocate them south of Western Boulevard and Martin Luther King Boulevard. And we show as dashed lines the street plan streets. They're not essential to that project, but the major traffic project would be to take all of these movements. And the big change here is if you were going down South Dawson Street and you wanted to head west on Western Boulevard, you would actually go under the bridge and loop around in order to make that movement. So both of these options are currently being studied by Kimley Horn under contract to the city. When we have those results of how they work operationally, we'll be in a position to present it to the stakeholders. Obviously, a key stakeholder is NCDOT has to be satisfied that these options work operationally before they're willing to agree to either one. And then, of course, if we do emerge from this process with a preferred alternative, then we will need to find a way to implement it, since only portions of it would be implemented by the City Gateway project. So with that, I'm going to turn the podium over to Kenneth Ritchie, who's going to go pick up where I left off, talking about the downtown mobility study.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Kenneth Ritchie with Transportation. So the next few slides are really going to kind of focus on some efforts that we've got with enhancing a lot of our multimodal connectivity from Dix really over to Chavis and really in between. And that really kind of starts with our downtown mobility study, which an element of that is looking at the Dix to Chavis strollway concept design. The intent of this effort is to really take a hard look at our downtown network. How do we start to enhance our multimodal network? How do we make sure that we're providing accommodations for bikes and pedestrians? And one of the challenges there, and I think some of the discussions that will be had, is we have limited right-of-way space within our downtown. So we're not going to be able to get every mode on every street. And so certainly those are going to be some key conversations that will be upcoming as part of this effort. Part of that with the Dix to Chavis Strollway is understanding that east-west connectivity, our southern kind of east-west corridor, is Lenore and south. And that really is that impetus of connection between Dix and Chavis. So how do we make sure that we provide those mobility connections? But also, too, how do we make sure coming out of this with that concept design that we're setting a framework that is really going to give us the opportunity and a palette to celebrate the cultural heritage of this area with the final product? And so for the strollway, this will be kind of a phase one of this to get to a conceptual design. There will be a second effort that will take that through final design and construction, where really we'll get to that kind of final product there. Most recently with this study, we did have a public engagement meeting, May 29th, we held at Raleigh Union Station. We had about 150 people attend. It was a great event, really excited. But that was just the kickoff. We've got an online survey that's going to be out there through the end of the month, and we're also looking at some targeted stakeholder engagements to really make sure that we're understanding the needs, desires of the community as we really look at this holistic approach. That is being managed by Barbara Godwin in the Transportation Department. As we start to follow that connectivity down, the Southwest Downtown Bike and Ped Gateway project, this is really kind of what I would consider the center point of the connection between the Lake Wheeler Road project and then what we're looking at with the Downtown Mobility Study and the Strollway project. So this is that connection of South Saunders Street, really from the realigned Lake Wheeler Road up to South Street and Lenoir. This is federally funded. We did submit this through the locally administered projects program at Campo and NCDOT. And this is really focused on extending a multi-use path up South Saunders Street to provide that additional bike and ped connection, really looking at a safer design with some median introductions, safer bike and ped movements across, connecting over to as we get towards the prison and over towards NC State and that. This project is running along a very similar timeline with the Lake Wheeler Road project, and we're anticipating construction on this to start in the spring of '25, and that is being managed out of our engineering services department. Also, the Lake Wheeler Road project, so this is the corridor from Maywood to South Saunders that runs along the frontage of Dix Park and will integrate with the Play Plaza project that's currently underway. Just a little bit with this project, there are 4 new roundabouts proposed. We do have a mix of bike and ped facilities along the corridor. Those are the multimodal facilities are really along the frontage of the park. With this tight corridor, we've got a 6-foot sidewalk along the residential side, the east side of Lake Wheeler Road. We do have a mix of shared use path and separated bike and ped facilities along the frontage of the park to provide options for people as whether they're commuting or really trying to get to the park. This project, we're looking at acquisition to complete later this summer, fall, with construction to start in the spring. And this one too is being managed out of our engineering services department. Another effort that's ongoing at the park is the Rocky Branch Creek design. This is a current study to determine the feasibility of restoring and enhancing the creek along the northern edge of the park, and does also kind of look at potential realignment of that creek. That effort is currently being reviewed by the leadership team at the Dix Conservancy, and anticipate that final report coming to council later on this fall. And then looking at another opportunity before us, we are working with a group that includes the Dix Park Conservancy, A.J. Fletcher Foundation, the Raleigh Housing Authority, and the Downtown Raleigh Alliance to partner on a grant funding application through the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods grant program. This is a federal grant program through the USDOT that's really looking to restore community connectivity and access through removal, retrofit, mitigation, and replacement of eligible transportation infrastructure. And really the goal here is to receive some funding that really will hopefully help us build on some of these other efforts that we've got to enhance what we can deliver from a connectivity standpoint, to make sure that we're giving people those options in terms of how they can get to, through, and around our southern and downtown areas. This really is an emphasis from the 2019 Dix Park Master Plan to kind of create that greater connectivity and regional integration with a lot of our natural resources and our active transportation infrastructure. So more to come on that, likely earlier in '25. And so with that, I will now pass this over to Rodney Falk from the Convention Center to talk about Red Hat.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Rodney Falk from the Raleigh Convention and Performing Arts Complex. I'll start by giving you a summary of how we got to today in relation to the Raleigh Convention Center expansion and Red Hat Amphitheater relocation. In 2017, Visit Raleigh engaged JLL's Tourism and Destination team to commission a destination strategic plan to strengthen the area's destination product and increase overnight visitation over 10 years. In 2019, the city purchased the land adjacent to the Convention Center and the amphitheater as a new site of Red Hat Amphitheater, leading to expansion of the Convention Center at the current temporary amphitheater location. March 2020, the pandemic hit and plans were halted. And as we emerged out of the pandemic, JLL was re-engaged to refresh their previous work on the destination strategic plan to understand if the plan still had viability. The result was a resounding yes. We then engaged both JLL and Element Architects to study the expansion and relocation and share the vision. A couple of key points that came out of this study. First, along with additional hotel package, expansion of the RCC is needed to continue to grow Raleigh as a desired location to host events. And second, Red Hat Amphitheater's economic impact to Raleigh and specifically downtown is critical to the vibrancy of the area. We put together our funding request through the interlocal fund for $425 million, and we began a series of public stakeholder presentations. In August of '23, we were allocated $387.5 million for the RCC expansion and Red Hat Amphitheater relocation. Excuse me. We solicited an RFQ for architect and design firms, and this council approved that contract award in January of this year. In April, you also approved our construction manager at risk and owners representatives contract awards. Since November, we have been working with Ratio and TVS on the design work for the expansion and relocation of Red Hat, with the intention of having the amphitheater open for the '26 season and the convention center open in 2028. So why is Red Hat Amphitheater so important to downtown? As you can see here, the impact of our amp has had on our city. In 2019, we saw a record number of concerts at Red Hat. We held 44 concerts, and in 2020, we were slated to break that record too. Post-pandemic, in 2021, we started back hosting concerts, and the demand was there. People were ready to get out of their house, and it showed. They wanted the music, they wanted the merch, they wanted to eat and drink, and they wanted to be around other people. Red Hat Amphitheater wasn't the only beneficiary of this pent-up demand. Our downtown businesses felt it as well. There's a great quote here from Mr. Bill King summarizing the economic impact that Red Hat Amphitheater provides to many of our small and local owned businesses downtown. And then after our '23 season, we had our partners at Visit Raleigh run our data through their economic system, and we were pleasantly surprised at the results. In just 26 concerts of the '23 season, we had 143,000 attendees. 45,000 of them were from Wake County, and 98,000 of them were from outside the area. Of that 98,000, 65,000 stayed overnight at least one night. Those attendees equated to over $17.5 million in total economic impact to the area. And this year, we're scheduled to have over 50 concerts. In addition to our concert seasons, we continue to activate Red Hat with corporate events in the rink. Last year, we had 126 rink sessions that hosted over 25,000 residents. So let's talk about design. As we've been designing both properties, you can imagine that downtown area space is not our ally. When we initially kicked off our concepts, it was clear that we needed to close one of the adjacent streets and then all of our early renderings suggested that the closing of Lenore would be the best option to utilize the combined site between Cabarrus and South Street. As we started to work with our design team, we realized that this would not get us the amphitheater that would continue to provide the same economic impact and experience for our attendees and artists as our current temporary amp. It would drastically reduce our capacity. Our current capacity is at 5,900. With a Lenore Street closure, the site constraints will limit capacity to less than 4,500. The artist experience and backstage amenities would not meet current industry standards. Operationally, it would be a challenge with a reduced site. Our respective teams would be battling for the same venue space, food and beverage, merch sales, restrooms, security, all now push inward with the tighter site. Patron safety would be impacted, ingress, egress lanes would be minimal, and we'd be challenged to meet building codes for the reduced capacity. The artist experience would be hindered, and the acoustical experience would be a negative impact not only to concert goers, but also for our Raleigh Convention Center clients. Financial impacts with this design would be that the overall construction costs would be significantly higher, and revenues would be much lower. Currently running under Lenore Street are vital city infrastructures, including electrical, sewer lines, water, gas, and fiber, and relocation expenses for moving this critical infrastructure would be significant. The construction cost to build the new AMP would be impacted as we wouldn't be able to take advantage of the natural grade changes of the site. The reduction of capacity and overall space would have a negative impact on future revenue from food and beverage, merch, and ticket sales. Here's a map of those utility lines. As you can see under Lenore Street, which is the top lines, and then South Street, the bottom, the disparity of utilities between Lenore Street and South Street is pretty evident. We then explored the option of closing a block of South Street between Dawson and McDowell. Still a tight site, however, it did solve for the majority of the operational, safety, and cost challenges we discovered in the Lenore Street option. We were able to increase our capacity of the AMP to over 6,500. We will have the backstage amenities and artist experience that drives where artists choose to play. We are able to ensure a safer environment not only inside the AMP but outside the gates as well. Having the space for the patrons to safely navigate the event space, but also having the space to allow for safe egress and normal operations or emergency evacuations. And acoustics would be better for the attendees as well as our surrounding communities. Although utilities exist under South Street, it is a significantly less impact to the city's infrastructure and reduced costs for maneuvering. The current grading of the site will aid in reduction of site work excavating. The site will allow for requisite plaza space to accommodate for food and beverage, merchandise, and ticket revenue. And lastly, overall construction costs are more in line with our budget. So some of our early design conclusions. Throughout our design process to date, we have come to the following conclusions. Capacity of over 6,500 is a must to keep Red Hat Amphitheater as one of the top boutique amps in the country and continue to be an economic driver for our city. The only way that we're able to achieve this within budget is utilizing the block of South Street between McDowell and Dawson, And closure of South Street is the only viable option for Red Hat Amphitheater to be relocated in downtown. The site constraints have decided this for us. During this time that we have been evaluating our design options and the impact that each decision is making on the other projects you have heard about today, we've been engaging with our other city departments. One in particular is the Chavis to Dix Park Strollway. As you can see, here are some general maps, potential paths. As the strollway passes through our complex, we know how important it is to engage with the city team and see how our projects may impact their planning, as well as look for ways to enhance the strollways that bisects our complex. Here is a current view of an unsightly railway bridge at the corner of Dawson and Lenore. And here's a conceptual rendering on how our development can have a positive impact to the area. It can be imagined into a sense of place with landscape and public art elements. Current Lenore Street view as you progress west. And then a more pedestrian-friendly curbless street enhancing the bike and pedestrian movement through this area. We have the expansion of the convention center on the right of this picture and then Red Hat on the left. As much as we focus on the front of house and entry into our venues, we cannot forget the back of the house. Here is the current view of the corner of South Street and Dawson. And here's what it can look like. A conceptual rendering using city-owned land on the left and making it a pocket park can continue that sense of place for our residents, whether they're taking the strollway to Dix Park, to walking their dog, or heading to one of our great downtown venues. Our next steps in our project is formally close a block of South Street between Dawson and McDowell by submitting our application for street closure, which will be brought to council in the third quarter of this year. Provide design updates to council in quarter 3 of this year. Have a Red Hat Amphitheater groundbreaking anticipated for the first quarter of 2025, and continue our design process for Red Hat Amphitheater and Raleigh Convention Center with the intention of opening in 2026 for the new amphitheater and 2028 for the expansion of the Raleigh Convention Center. Thank you for your time.
Do we have any other presenters?
So Mayor, Council, we do have a couple of additional slides that we can speak to, but I think it is probably an appropriate point to pause and see if there are questions. The remaining slides in the presentation cover some of those contextual, conceptual projects that Mr. Young spoke to at the outset of the presentation, but we can pause here to see if there are questions about what you have, what's been shared with you so far.
Okay, Councilmember Branch, then Councilmember Fort.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the presentation and the information. A couple of questions. My first one is around the street plan at Heritage Park. I just want to be clear in my understanding and make sure everyone else is. The Raleigh Housing Authority is fully aware of the street plan since the very beginning of them trying to redevelop the area, correct?
Yes, they're aware of the fact that there's 2 map streets across the property on the Raleigh Street plan.
Okay, so we've been working with them in these designs and trying to figure out what works best.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've advised them that there's a couple paths forward. One is we try to find, the dotted lines on the map are treated as sort of conceptual connections that the specifics of them get worked out when a development plan comes in for a property that those streets traverse. So what's shown on the map is not precise. So you can adjust it. The basic intent here is to provide some connectivity where it currently doesn't exist and allow West Street and there to be pedestrian flows and other flows down to BRT on Western Boulevard. So if there is a way to implement those overall goals that deals with the concerns expressed by both the Housing Authority team and the community residents about throwing a lot of traffic through the middle of the community, and that was satisfactory, that would be one option. The other option is they could petition the council to modify the street plan, which happens. We had a petitioner with a request like that in front of you just at their last meeting. Decision has been deferred on that item, but it's we see those, and that is an option that they could pursue as well.
Okay. And my last question is and this is around transit per se, options 3A and options 4, the quadrants. The little part, I guess I'm going to say at the corner of the pie. I'm on slides 15 and 14. I see one, let's start here, where we have the blue line. Is that help me understand the intersection at South McDowell and South Dawson.
So I would say that these diagrams were put together at our last stakeholder meeting, and as we've gotten a little bit more into it, it's evolved. So let's see. This little loop-to-loop that was designed to deal with the fact that someone coming eastbound on South Street and encountering the closed block would have no option but to go south, and is there a way to provide a turnaround? Our transportation staff has been working with DOT. They really don't like this option because of the need to cross multiple lanes of traffic to get to it, notwithstanding the fact that there might still be a light that stops traffic. So I'm not sure that that's going to happen. And then this is kind of this would be a movement that, again, would replace an existing movement that's currently handled by the loop. You can't make a left turn, obviously, from here onto here. If you want to go, that's basically replacing a left turn here, and that's to make the signal here a simpler signal with fewer phases than if you had to accommodate a left.
Okay.
So that was kind of what was thrown out there. This has been modified a little bit as the study has progressed, and there's been more convergence towards a memorandum of understanding within CDOT of exactly what the parameters are. The study, and we had a discussion with Kimley Horn to try to firm that up before it's submitted in CDOT yesterday. So that should hopefully be going out this week. The other one, again, the major changes here are that all of the turning movements are relocated here. So this left turn that's up there is now down at this signal. So we're relying on this signal to accommodate a lot of the turns. And the only thing this signal is doing is allowing people coming on MLK towards Western Boulevard to make a left into this ramp to go southbound, where currently they go around this loop. The advantage of this is it takes all of this ramp infrastructure out of the quadrant of the interchange where Heritage Park is today, and potentially if we could work a similar arrangement that the private developer did here with NCDOT to acquire that right of way, it could significantly enlarge the Heritage Park site. I've put on the street extensions as shown in the street plan on this map, and there's an option, would you run it all the way to McDowell? I think the concern there is that that could bring traffic that would normally go across South Street, might come across Dorothea Drive and then come up this way to continue from, say, South Saunders to head east on South Street. How much traffic, I think it remains to be part of the study, but we did ask Kimley Horn to look into that just for informational purposes, so we would have some numbers as opposed to just simple speculation as to what the potential traffic loads there could be. But this takes all of the movements out, and I think a key thing is you wouldn't want to provide a shortcut to Western Boulevard via these streets, because that movement is supposed to be handled down to the south by allowing this left turn shown in blue that loops around onto Western Boulevard.
Okay.
I know it's complicated. We spent a long time staring at these options to try to figure out some good options. The animating idea, though, I just want to stress is the same animating idea that was in the Southern Gateway plan to begin with, which was take what is a very suburban, loopy piece of suburban highway infrastructure that's right on the edge of downtown and constraining a lot of land, and shrink its footprint, make it more urban, and provide more land for affordable housing on the Heritage Park property. I think that's really the big bottom line that we're trying to work towards with all these different options. And so that's been kind of the central focus, and everything has been organized around those goals.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Fort?
Thank you. Somebody mentioned that there was a community engagement meeting on the 29th of May. I'm not sure who, okay. Over 100 people attended that meeting, is that correct?
Correct.
So did y'all discuss the South Street closure at that meeting, and were people given an opportunity to weigh in there, or what was covered in the meeting?
So I don't know if we specifically called out the South Street. Really, the intent of that engagement that we had on the 29th was really just to kind of kick off the effort and start the conversation about, okay, what are we looking at with this overall effort? Our focus really, as we've gone into the study, has been not to try and focus on whether it's South or Lenoir, but really looking at both of them as kind of being critical to what we're trying to achieve with this. And certainly the South Street piece, I think, is a piece that we're working through. But I think while it is a challenge, I do think it also presents some other opportunities that likely will play out as we look at especially as we look at that future grant opportunity.
And I know going forward, there'll probably be opportunities to have conversations about the strollway, the design, things along those lines. Who will be handling the community engagement for that portion, do you know?
So it'll be a combination of our transportation team, our consultant, who is Kimley Horn, and we have been working with the Community Engagement Office to help with that as well.
Okay, because it sounds like they're getting a lot of inquiries about what's been happening, the Community Engagement Office specifically. And I guess my last point, it sounds like with the changes from a transportation standpoint, and if you're able to move the sewer line, then that certainly would give RHA a little more flexibility to add more units on the property. Is that correct?
That's certainly, I think, what we're anticipating with some of these efforts, is trying to make sure that we're maximizing possibilities.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Could somebody kind of run through the strollway portion of this as well? My big concern, obviously, we've been working on this. I want to make sure there's going to be no negative impacts or major changes in that effort.
So we're not anticipating any changes really to that effort. This is really, we were understanding that as we look at our downtown system in total, that Lenoir and South corridor is going to be critical in terms of our kind of southern east-west connection. But also understanding that it's not just the mobility piece of this that is really critical to that effort. And so aligning it with this downtown study was really starting to look at, okay, what are the different options we can have for the corridors, leveraging all the different variables. And that's why we've kind of looked at it as a conceptual design as part of this effort. And so once this whole effort is looking at about 12 to 15 months. So we will be back about this time next year, kind of with the final results of that. And that will then kick into what will kind of be what we'd consider final design and moving towards construction. And that's where we'll start getting into the details of some of the cultural preservation pieces. What does it look like from a public art standpoint? All of those that really play into that. But really, we're looking at a toolkit and making sure that we're preserving that continuity to make sure to be able to really preserve and tell the story of the heritage in this area.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions for staff? Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, thanks for this. Can someone speak to the S line just a little bit? I'm looking at the slide that's included at the end of the packet, and it mentions closures there. Are those street closures or the just grade separations?
Let me get to that slide and then I can speak to that. Let's go. So yes, so with the S-Line project, and I think just understanding that a focus with the S-Line right now is really from Union Station north. And with that, we do know that Hargett Street is going to be severed to at least vehicular traffic. We are continuing to discuss with NCDOT how we can at least preserve bike and pedestrian connectivity along that corridor. A lot of that has to do with the platform that they will be building as part of the expansion of Union Station to support the S-Line. The other pieces that really kind of play into this, when you look at West Street and Cabarrus, as part of the West Street Extension South project, NCDOT is a partner of ours for that project. And part of what has been that they put into that agreement was that when their partnership in the West Street Extension project was going to be predicated on that grade crossing of Cabarrus Street closing. So we do potentially in the future lose that vehicular connectivity. One thing that we have started looking at is the feasibility of, again, bike and pedestrian connectivity to maintain along that corridor. So it could be some sort of bike and pedestrian underpass that goes under the railway. But a lot of what the department's looking at and then what the rail lines are looking at is trying to mitigate a lot of safety issues that you have with those at-grade crossings. So there are going to be a lot of the at-grade rail crossings that are going to be probably programmed to close as part of some of these efforts, especially as we start thinking about more high-speed rail service that's going to be coming with this first phase of the S-Line and with certainly, I think, future phases as they anticipate the growth of that.
Okay, so did I hear you correctly? You said there at Cabarrus that might be closed to vehicular access?
Long-term, yes.
Okay, so if we close South Street and then we close Cabarrus Street, we've lost two like east-west connectors.
And certainly that is an area that we're trying to study and make sure we preserve as much connectivity as we can along those corridors. And certainly to the extent possible, making sure that we're preserving the opportunity for multimodal connectivity to remain along those, even if we do lose vehicular.
Okay. All right, I think that might be it on the S-Line for me. I do know we have Raleigh Housing Authority in the audience, if it's not too much to put you all on the spot, if you wanted to give you an opportunity to share any of your concerns that have come up or any thoughts you have.
Excuse me, who did you?
Raleigh Housing Authority is in the audience.
This is a work session, so I don't think that would be appropriate at this time. But we will schedule a meeting with them, which is overdue. So we will have an opportunity to have those discussions. Do we have any other questions of staff?
I do. I was hoping that some of the conversation at the table would help me work through some of my thoughts or the questions that I have. And I think mine are a little bit more fundamental because I don't understand some of the scopes. And clearly these are conversations that have been happening for some time now. Kind of really early for me because I don't think I've really seen some of these things in this much detail. So the question I have is specifically around the Heritage Park and the connections between there and Western Boulevard, and just helping me understand how road projects through the property helps with the more creation of affordable housing or low income housing, or helps them do more? Because that's something that you brought up, Ken. So I'm like, how does that work? Just if you can explain that some.
The idea is to reclaim the land that's currently under the loops and create 4 rectangular blocks. Rectangular blocks tend to lend themselves to an efficient layout. Every development, especially one on a piece of land the size of Heritage Park, needs access ways. Those could be public or private. Making them public provides public street connectivity, puts them back on the downtown grid, would have some impact potentially on overall development yield, but current work on the site plan seems to indicate that there's substantial upside yield on across the property, even with some public streets. But that is certainly an impact. You could potentially get a few more units if all the access ways were private.
Okay, because I know that originally some of the conversation was about doing some denser development there. So I was just wondering how that would play in. And I was looking, you guys are talking about north-south connectivity as well as east-west connectivity. Right. And I think that would add to the east-west connectivity but then that's also concerning in some ways because of the neighborhood itself. But I also, and thank you for explaining that to me, Ken. I didn't really understand what was happening with the Red Hat Amphitheater. When you guys say closing the streets, you mean there's no access at all?
Well,
where are they moving it? Are they moving the placing of the amphitheater from where it is? I was just confused by that. I hadn't heard about that either.
So this is a good overhead shot. As you can see where this says food service access behind the amphitheater, that is South Street as it bisects Dawson. So that's that block there between Dawson and McDowell, South Street, that we would be anticipating to close. Because if you go back to this layout here, that just shows you the reduced footprint of the amphitheater. And that is with the Lenore closing. So to be able to...
Is this where it currently is now?
No, it's currently where the convention center expansion is located right there. That's the current...
See, that's where I was confused.
Yeah,
I just
no
wasn't
problem.
understanding. Okay, cool. And so that is kind of a lynch point from what I was looking at between the east-west connectivity. So are there plans for some other places for east-west connectivity across downtown if we're closing? Because you guys said South Street and Lenore Street were the 2 main streets.
Well, we're proposing just South Street because we've studied both Lenore and South.
Right. I got that from I was asking, I guess that's another question for transportation. Thank you.
So we are looking at different opportunities to try and preserve that, at least the bike ped connectivity of what would be lost with that South Street closure. And so certainly continued conversations and certainly part of our ongoing downtown mobility study.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. I know you said you're going to be coming back later with some more stuff, and I'm really excited to see it. And I had a really interesting conversation with somebody who was talking about murals and public art and getting that into the downtown areas. So I'd be interested to see if you guys have anything about that. But I really enjoyed learning more about this.
Councilmember Fort, then Jones.
Okay. I think Ms. Hinton from the Community Engagement Office is here. Is that correct? Mosley.
Now Mosley.
Mosley,
Yeah, we got to
Mosley.
get used to that.
That's right. Hinton, better known as Mosley now. So, okay. Can you tell us what your community engagement efforts have been? I know I've gotten inquiries from folks about this project and there being some concerns about things not necessarily being highlighted or daylighted. What have you been working on as it relates to this?
Yeah, so our office has been involved earlier on with the engagement for the Chavis Strollway and South Park Heritage Walk. And so those are the efforts that we were a part of early conversations with. And so that's the extent to which we've been intimately involved on all of the projects that y'all are discussing today.
Okay. So, and I guess I'm just speaking from the perspective of having folks reaching out. Going forward, what needs to happen to have your office, I guess, more involved? Because it seems like you may be the touch point where people reach out to get information about the project or what's happening and have some expectation that you'd be able to sort of field some of that information. So,
Yep, that's a good question. We have been contacted about some different parts of the projects here. So what we'll do is get together with some of the folks that you heard from today, so that we can have a deep dive as to where we are at this point. And then we can facilitate some type of engagement plans or outreach strategies to make sure that we're all on one accord.
thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Jones, and then Branch.
Thank you. In having a brief conversation with RHA, just hearing the email, I'm wondering what the conversations look like, and I don't know who this is pointed to, but when we lose that connection with South Street and we've got an affordable housing development that then loses that access and that cross, does that make them feel more isolated? And have we talked about that, as we're isolating different communities and especially of affordable housing from being able to cross there? What does that conversation sound like?
So I think I'll try to tackle that question. I think, one of the things that we recognize is the trade-offs, essentially, that are sort of inherent in some of these decisions that we're presenting you with. And, I don't know that it was specifically mentioned. I think you may have seen it in one of the charts. What we're trying to achieve, even in that closure of that portion of South Street, is a potential. We're in conversations, Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, right now with NCDOT about essentially trying to create a loop. I don't know if I can draw this here, but something that would allow kind of a continued connection as you come along South Street if we were to relocate it in the way that we're sharing with you today. So we're, as we are learning things about these projects, as we are designing the projects and understanding the impacts, we're doing everything that we can. Certainly in conversations, I know we've had RHA at the table for several months specifically about this, along with the other projects that you've heard, talking about ways that we can, to the extent possible, offset any potential negative impacts that could be created by virtue of the way that these projects unfold.
Sure. So I appreciate that RHA has been there through these conversations, so I'm sure that this is not any news, like surprising news or words that you guys haven't said about feeling isolated and things. Did this solution of this, what you just drew on there, was that in RHA, did they say, oh, that's a comparable one? Or is that something that there's still discussions happening?
I wouldn't want to put words in RHA's mouth about their feelings on this. I think from staff's perspective, we, again, recognize the desire for connectivity east-west, not just for RHA's purposes, but just generally, preserving east-west connectivity from a bike and pedestrian perspective, but also from a vehicular perspective. And so what we are trying to put forward as we move forward are options. Again, those are not decisions that have been made at this point. Obviously, those are relatively early conversations with NCDOT specifically about this vision that I'm sharing with you, because candidly, our discovery that this was really the only option in order to move and advance the Red Hat project is a fairly recent discovery in itself. So, this is a constant sort of evolution, and we're troubleshooting as we learn more.
Okay, thank you.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, it's more of a request than a question. Right now, we're not sure what the timing is of when a new connection will be put in and the closure of South Street. So my request, that, if I may, is that you all continue to work with the Raleigh Housing Authority and figure out, share where some of these timetables may fall, so that can help everyone out with the planning. And that way we can also ensure that we have a new connection if South Street is closed before South Street is physically closed.
Any other comments? Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, I just want to say, philosophically, we know that this highway element was placed here during urban renewal and run through a thriving Black community. So to take away these elements is an important way of correcting the failures of past city leaders. So philosophically aligned with the subtraction that's being done here. Also, Ms. Octavia, thanks for always keeping us reminded about Fourth Ward, and we don't want to forget about it. And so I think this is some of what we're seeing here is really important and honoring and moving forward some of that. And these are really big projects. I was exhausted just listening to y'all just describe all the things that are happening. Can someone, maybe you, Mr. Raleigh, give us just tell me when I need to have opinions on these things?
There are a lot of things here, Councilmember Patton. So I do, just before I respond to that, do just want to acknowledge Councilmember Branch's comment. Absolutely, it's our desire to continue to, remain tightly connected to all the other projects that are happening adjacent to this one, as evidenced by the stakeholder meeting that we have convened and continue to convene going forward. I do just want to, just for purposes of, expectation setting, acknowledge the differences in the timeline in terms of when these determinations will ultimately be made. So as far as this realignment, if you will, of South Street that I've drawn here, I do not have great confidence that we're going to be able to get a determination from NCDOT on their support for this, before, at least in our anticipated timeline for the Red Hat relocation, before that determination would have to be made. Just kind of stepping back high level, as the decision-making timeline around the amphitheater relocation has several components of it. One is we've embarked on this project trying to ensure that we won't essentially lose an amphitheater season with the construction timeline. So everything at this point is oriented around ensuring that essentially we are able to reach groundbreaking on the project later in the fall at the conclusion of the current amphitheater season. So I say that to say I don't know that the timeline for decision-making from NCDOT on this would necessarily align with us being able to maintain that project schedule.
Let me know when myself and Michael need to talk to Brandon.
Will do. Okay.
Who are we working with at NCDOT?
Yeah, so Paul Callen, Transportation. So just to answer that, so we've got an upcoming meeting with Brandon here at the end of the month to talk about the realignment of South Street, and then a couple other things associated with the convention center expansion. So just a FYI on that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
When do you need me to have opinions on which of these things?
So are you speaking about, because we've covered several projects, I want to make sure I'm speaking to the one that's
Yeah.
top of mind for you.
I'm tempted to say all of them. when are there decision points? I know this is for information.
Yeah.
But when are there decision points that you'll need from us?
So maybe I'll defer to some of the other departments, that have spoken to some of the other projects. I can speak about Red Hat, I think, is the one we spent the most time on. As Rodney noted in the next steps, what the next sort of formal council action that would enable us to proceed in the way that we've proposed to you today would be the petition for the street closure, which is happening. We anticipate that would appear before you in the third quarter of this year. So that would be, obviously we're not going to wait for feedback until then. We do also anticipate bringing you kind of a midway. At this point, we don't even have renderings to show you. We're still in the phase of evaluating the options related to the site that we have to work with. So we will also be bringing you between now and then a midstream update on the design. So that will give you a couple of additional touch points for you all to share your perspective and interest, particular desires in this project.
I think that the renderings are an important part of this, so people can actually see it. And one thing you might want to consider is a walking work session where you can actually show people what we're talking about instead of sitting here looking at what we're talking about.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind. Sure.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much for being here, and we will adjourn the meeting. We'll be back at 7 o'clock for public comment. Thank you.